Subscribe to Feminism in India for your dose of intersectional feminist content and make sure to hit the bell icon to get all the latest updates.
Hello, everyone. We are back with another episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style brought to you by Feminism in India. I am your host, Pragya,
And I'm Nishtha.
and today we are talking about sexting and the internet or the cyberspace in general. So, Nishtha, have you sexted?
Okay, so I have not, because frankly, for me, that's just something that I find not really exciting. Or maybe I haven't explored it enough, but no, I haven't sexted a lot, and I have actually not even been online dating platforms a lot because that's something that just doesn't work for me. So I'm giving you a heads up. Today's episode is really going to be about me asking you questions and you talking to us, and a lot of things that I want to talk about today are all from secondhand research. But on the matter of dating and sexting and things like that, I do have a funny anecdote that I can share. I actually had a friend who was an aspiring stand-up comedian who would only join Tinder and Bumble and things like that to get material for her stand-up routine. So honestly, that for me, that's kind of tainted the image of dating sites in general. But okay, I have a question for you. Have you sexted?
Unlike you, I have sexted, but I can totally relate to you when you say that it just does not work for you. I have never sexted with people or strangers I have met on the internet. I have sexted only with partners who I have developed a level of trust and, a mutual relationship of trust with them. But like you mentioned, it did not work for you. It also did not work for me for a long time. For the initial few relationships, I didn't enjoy sexting because I was continuously paranoid of not only sharing personal anecdotes or private pictures, but I also feared that there would be a third person outside the two of us who might have access to my sex and I might fall into trouble. Like, that was a real fear for me. And I did not understand the point of sexting with such anxiety, and it wasn't pleasurable for me. I continuously questioned, why am I even doing this? But honestly, even outside the internet, I have asked that question quite so often in my sexual relationships with people. Jokes apart, I actually learned how to sext from one of my partners who was kind enough to ask me, so, Pragya, do you even enjoy this, or are you doing this for the sake of the relationship? And that was the first time I thought that I should give this more thought and just not do it because, it's cool or others do it. So, yeah, that has been my experience.
Okay, so then I'm waiting on such a partner, and if you're out there, hit me up. But okay, so now let's actually diving into this episode because you bring up a lot of really interesting things through your own personal experience of this sense of shame and anxiety, and kind of how pictures end up being utilized improperly. So before we sort of jump into all of that, I want to ask you, what was your first introduction to the internet? Like when did the internet become a part of your life?
See, I grew up in a Bengali middle class, so called progressive household where I had a very early access to the computer, internet, and a cell phone. I mean, it was early for, say, our generation. Nowadays, I see that most middle class households and their children have these resources because they need them for a lot of purposes. So, my parents were not technologically educated, and there was a huge gap in information. And like sex and sexuality, internet education was also very minimal in my case. And I could even say that I figured out sex, sexuality, and the internet all at the same time, and they were all very interconnected to one another. So I explored all of these things all together. And whatever my school, or even now, whatever schools teach about the internet or the three W's they call the World Wide Web, is very useless information. I mean, they never tell you about the risks of the platform and the technicalities that might cause us harm. They just throw these random terms and then you're just done. So, this early exposure to the internet really shaped on how I perceive the internet, one, and two, how I also behave on the internet. I actually police myself and I restrict myself to express, certain degree of sexuality or identity on the internet. What about you, Nishta? How do you feel about the internet?
Pragya, you're absolutely right. In fact, when you were talking about sexuality education in India and along with that also, the internet, I actually realized that because of the way that we are taught these things, it's never actually comprehensive education where it said that this is natural, this is something that will happen, this is something that is a part of your life. It's always made into such a monster that you end up going either of two ways. You either have extreme anxiety about anything to do on the internet or with your own sexuality, which is somewhere where I think you and I are, or you end up rebelling and being really unsafe and not really taking a lot of risks into account. And I think that of course comes from the fact that it's always just thrown at us as such an alien thing. I also often wonder, this is something that when you ask me about what is the internet like for me, I'm just going to come back to, well, what is sort of a running theme in all of our podcast episodes, which is a question of intersectionality, right? I'm a cishet woman who comes from an upper class background. So I feel like my experiences will be dynamically different from experiences of other women on the internet, because much like every other space in our life, every other space that we occupy, even the internet is extremely intersectional. So before we were actually writing and reading this, researching for this episode, I was going through some of the articles that we have on our website that you have edited, haha, Pragya, which actually talk about many persons with disability in the FII writers community talking about how when they're going through actually dating online and things like that, how the questions that they get asked are so pervasive, are so much more difficult. So, it's almost like a lot of identities online just end up becoming a source point for satiating people's curiosity and actually becoming fetishized. And to understand this a little bit more, we actually spoke to Neel Sengupta, who's a trans woman, who was telling us about her experiences of navigating dating and sexting online.
Thank you, Pragya and Nishtha, for bringing together this conversation. I think dating as a trans woman has made me realize the predicaments most of us attracted to the opposite gender feel. That men can often be pedantic, obnoxious, and mildly annoying. I think this is the work of patriarchy at large. You see, it's like a choreographed set of networks that bores its tentacles on the world we inhabit and endure. I think we should understand, or perhaps understand, that trans is more than our bodies and freedoms. It is but also our deepest desires. And in fact, it is emotionally and physically consuming to live out those strangely pleasing rom-com moments where the public space is not violent, but a space to feel acknowledged and understood. The grammar of these rendezvous has changed over the past few years. While many online dating platforms have diverse gender options, there is an incredible lack of knowledge on the other side. And I find myself frequently marked as the exotic and the experimental when it comes to a romantic or a sexual match. This is the part where privilege plays its devious role. And as much as there are common experiences that comfort both cis women and trans women in their shared joys of meeting like-minded and kind-hearted men, there are, of course, stark differences when it comes to performing in a gendered structure. It is the process of experiencing the fleeting moments of affection and care, and expressing one's anxiety in a safe and intimate environment. In many ways, I feel the intersectional internet is biased. It is increasingly oriented to gender that flows in a straight line, in fixed patterns and styles. And as a woman who has a constant urge to pass, to queer the systems and networks, there is an immense load to bear on the body, on the face, on one's hair. The twitch and the twinkle, the gesture and the posture. And as more trans women come to dating circles, the more vivid these similarities and differences will be. And more, perhaps, our inequalities will come to light, and hopefully trigger much needed reforms from both cis women and men on the other side of the table.
Thank you, Neil. I think our listeners will agree when I say that the internet has increasingly become a very important part of our lives in the last decade. And we have also started expressing ourselves on the internet. We express our sexuality, we meet people on the internet, we look for love, we look for sex, and we look for a lot of things on the internet that we might not find otherwise in our daily life. And that happens, right? Because for a lot of people, for example, the internet becomes a safe space because there is a screen. A lot of people are awkward or introverted and they find it difficult to talk to people face to face. And so the internet then becomes this great space to meet people, or even just not even meet people, to create a community and express sexuality. So it is a double edged sword. The internet becomes a double edged sword where for a lot of us, it could become a space where we could express ourselves better because, to be honest, real life sucks. And a lot of people around us just judge us for our bodies, for our beliefs, for our ideologies. And so internet becomes the space where you can connect to so many people around the world, and you can find your community, you can find your safe space, and you can express yourself there.
And I think that the relevance of the internet has never been higher than perhaps in the past 9 or 10 months, when we've all sort of been physically restricted to our homes, and the only kind of community feeling that you can have is actually through the internet. I mean, for everybody who's listening, I actually joined feminism in India during the lockdown. So Pragya and I have never seen each other face to face, and yet here we are talking to each other about so many personal things, and about, she's like my friend now. So, and we've never even met. And that's something that's only possible because of the internet, and because of the fact that we found like ways to communicate with each other. And if we were to actually come back and talk about relationships online, it's just been such a savior for so many people during the virus, right? Even for sexual gratification and expressing your sexuality, which is important, which perhaps some people listening be like, "Ho, ye kya baat kar rahi hai?" But the truth is, that's a very natural and important part of your life. You do have needs, you do have desires. Those are things that need expression. And sexting is something that really does allow for a person to feel a lot more comfortable in their body. Because look, at the end of the day, if you can take your top off and take that picture, that means you've got some serious guts, right? You're absolutely comfortable with, or if not absolutely comfortable, because I don't think that, I mean, I'd like to meet a person who's absolutely comfortable with their body, but at least you're getting there, you're trying to, at least in some way, in small ways, challenge this sort of moral compass and sword that's hanging over our bodies and our sexuality at all points in time. And I think the internet has played a great role in that. So yes, while, I mean, like everything, the internet has its shortcomings, which will be something that we will be talking about, we also can't take away from the fact that it's really helped a lot of people come in on their own. And we do not need to see sex as something negative and immoral, or something that we're just duty bound to do to make children. And to tell us more about this, we actually spoke to Gunjan Sharma, who's a consulting sexpert with Love Matters, who actually has spent a lot of time talking about our sexuality and sexting, and she's going to be telling us what she thinks about all of this. So let's hear from her.
So, everything about sexting is just perfectly A-okay until suddenly it goes from oh to oh ho, until something just goes OB or out of bounds, and then you particularly are in not so comfortable a situation. From something which was supposed to be sexy, fun, raunchy, in fact, even hugely suggested as foreplay, in which we would say send them a sexy text from work, show them a photo of yourself in the shower, tell them what you're going to do when you see them next. Things like that have actually all got washed down with the same shower soap, replaced by the sound of not so heavy breathing as it was supposed to be, but rather huge alarm bells going gong gong. Sexting now comes with a new knell of doom. It comes with an unwritten footnote: be careful or be sorry. To me, this sounds like a bit of a finger wagging in your face, which is going, you should have known better, kind of an admonishing coming my way. Well, to sext or not to sext, that's the question. What does actual anonymity mean? Are you really as anonymous, or do you need to up your game in that area before you get down and dirty? That to get more anonymous, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about there. Are there any ethics in sexting and online sex? Who draws a line and where? And is it under your control? Who do we goddamn trust? Is there anything called a relationship, and what defines it? Who defines it? Are there any written or unsaid codes of conduct? Thou shalt and thou definitely shall. Who is calling those shots? And finally, power. Who has it? Where does power lie? Frankly, I'd like to say, as long as we are living this happy world of la la land where both of us have consent and negotiation, we both do I text because I can do it, I can get away with it, it's so risky, it's risque, and I can keep it random and anonymous. Great, huge power rush. If I can send a picture of my, say, sexy wax vagina, and I control the sending, the anonymity of whose body it belongs to. Well, I mean, it's just that it's not attached to any other body, the same mine in this case. Well, again, huge power. The anonymity, the ability, the agency that I can do it and I can get away with it. But it's also equally about agency, about self-determination, about being a sexual person and claiming it, isn't that? On the flip side, and I'll stop with this, try explaining that to the local cop or your mom or your dad or all those eyes who look at you when you show up to office the next day. So the jury pretty much is in my head clear, but yes, it comes with so many what ifs. And perhaps that is the problem with sexting that we are going to have to grapple with, and we have to perhaps be talking about. And what exactly constitutes safety? What exactly constitutes adult? What constitutes consent? The stuff which we all may want to talk about at some point of time.
Gunjan gave us some really good insights. I have to confess something. Despite me being the sex positive feminist outside the internet, I am pretty scared of the internet. And I also have this mental block of finding love or even partners on the internet. And this has nothing to do with the kind of people I have met on the internet. I think I've met really nice people who have become pretty close friends later, but I still have this mental block where I'm so scared because people around me, a lot of women around me, have had really difficult experiences on the internet. And that kind of has shaped the way I look at cyber sexting, or in general even talking to people on dating apps. It's so laborious, and it feels that there is a sort of, I have to restrict myself and I cannot go beyond a certain amount of information, because what if that information is taken and abused? And I don't know if this is just me or even others who are listening to us feel this way, because I had a very, like I said, I had a very early exposure to the internet, which was unsupervised. And that led to a lot of incidents, and not necessarily they were horrible, but they were potentially horrible experiences. And that ended up being the deciding factor on how today I police myself or my body or my thoughts on the internet, and how much access am I going to give this person online, um, how much access of my life am I going to give this person online. Sexting then becomes such a difficult, far-fetched sort of thing that I personally find it very difficult to do with strangers.
Yeah, sexting, of course, is something that we've said that is something that you need to be really comfortable with. But for me, even the online space becomes really scary because, okay, I feel like we can't have an episode about cyber sexting and dating without talking about the ever present unsolicited dick pic in every girl's DMs. I am yet to meet a peer who has not received one of these. And it's just like, okay, I want to understand the psyche of people sending these dick pics. Like, unhe kya lagta hai? We're going to be on the metro or in the bus, and we're suddenly supposed to see this thing staring at us and get so aroused that we're just gonna automatically combust into flames or something like that. Like, I mean, grow up. Okay. And I remember the first time I ever received an unsolicited dick pic, it was like I felt so violated, even though it's something that has just become so normalized because everybody's gotten one. And that's actually kind of unfortunate that it's become normalized. I remember thinking that, oh my, wow, how can somebody just walk into my space and make me feel so uncomfortable? And that's the bad part about the internet, right? That yes, while you can limit who has access to you, people can still find really insidious ways of actually getting up in your space. So in such situations, even the concept of consent becomes something that is just so blurred. For instance, I was reading something that said that is swiping right on Tinder consent? And what is it consent for? Like, if I swipe right on Tinder on somebody, does that mean that what am I saying is okay for me to do?
Like you said, normalization of harassment, that is something that I have faced even from the closest of closest friends of mine. There was a time when my friends slut shamed me on the internet. I used to post a lot of so-called conventionally revealing pictures, and those that slut shaming episode went on for a long time under the garb of humor. For a long time I also shared that humor, but I gradually grew very uncomfortable with it. I tried even telling them that, please don't do that, avoid such comments on my photos. But because at some point I shared the spirit of comedy, my discomfort was not taken seriously at all, even by my friends. Like, these were my closest friends, and I felt like that itself was a breach of consent and a form of harassment. So, not only partners or even people you sext with, but even like friends have these ways of slut shaming you on the internet, and they too fail to understand consent. The internet, increasingly, that's why it becomes a very hostile place for, especially for women, because most of the time they, or even minorities, gender minorities, they often find themselves at the end of receiving such slut shamey comments on their pictures. And I keep thinking about the potential of harassment and abuse that might happen if I decide on sexting someone with who I have not been able to even develop a level of trust, or been in a proper committed, so-called committed relationship with.
You bring up a very interesting point of how there is this sort of fear of pictures. I think now would be a good time to segue into image based sexual violence, right? When intimate partners often end up revealing pictures that have been sent for only them, and where the communication is clear that if a certain picture has been sent or a certain image has been shared, it's only for the person who's on the receiving end, and they of course then go ahead and circulate that in breach of consent or as a form of revenge or for whatever perverse reasons that they may do that. So while this is a known phenomenon and this is something that we know happens, I think one of the things that we often overlook is how when one goes out to actually talk about this or to report it or to say raise an alarm when somebody is facing this kind of violence, they're often met with this sort of why did you send it in the first place, which again brings us back to victim blaming, which is just something that I don't know when is actually going to come to an end. And the second thing is, of course, seeing sex as something that's immoral, so if you've engaged in it, then you've quote unquote got what's coming to you. Even when there are legal remedies and routes and things that you can do, more often than not, people who have been on the receiving end of this kind of violence end up just not speaking out, because they know that they're going to be the ones who are going to also be held equally accountable for what they are told is something wrong, even though it's really not.
I think we can start by basic sensitization. People still look at sex and sexuality like stigma, like a topic we cannot discuss in family circles or in schools or in institutions. To tell us a little bit more about online violence and the redressal mechanisms that are available to us, we have Asmita Ghosh, who is a feminist activist working on digital advocacy and rights in India.
So, sexting can be really fun, really pleasurable, but unfortunately, there are risks with it. And as with everything in the world, these risks are worse for women and for queer people, especially those in the closet, because sex is such a taboo, and women's sexuality, especially, is such a taboo that it is very common to blackmail women with their sexuality, with proof in quotes of their sexuality. And for queer people, especially those in the closet, it can be a tool, sexting or a nude or a conversation that is leaked or goes into the wrong hands can be a tool to bully them, to out them in terms that they're not comfortable with. This is of course not to say that you should be so scared of it that you don't want to do it at all, because fortunately for us, it is 2020, and technology has evolved enough to significantly reduce these risks associated with sexting, and reduce the risks of image-based sexual abuse, which is more popularly known as revenge porn. So, what are some of the rules that you should be following when you're sexting? These are just basic principles that you should keep in mind, and it just makes it much easier for you to do so, for you to engage in sexting. The first thing that you should keep in mind, especially if you're talking to someone that you don't know or you've just met online, and you haven't met them before, you're just developing a relationship with them, is to control how much information you're giving out. This is, of course, not just in the sexting part, but even in the formation of this relationship. It depends on the platform. If you're on a platform that is already anonymous, there is no need to share your details unless you're absolutely comfortable. So take your time before you decide that you trust someone with, your name. And I would definitely recommend, if you have no intention of meeting them, to never share your real address, because there is a risk that if this person becomes pushy and violative, that it could spill over to offline harassment as well. So definitely I would warn against sharing your address or location with them, or even talking about where you're going to be at a certain time and things like that. And this doesn't really detract from the quality of your relationship. You can have very real, very meaningful relationships where you talk about your thoughts and feelings with people, but not necessarily reveal personal information that could be used to identify you, if that is the nature of the platform, if it's like an anonymous platform. But if it is, dating apps like Tinder or Bumble or Hinge, then there is an expectation that you are the person that you say you are, and you're using your real name and your real photos, and you're not, catfishing anybody. So, respect the rules of the platform that you're in, because also there is, if somebody else is engaging with you with their photos and their names, and there is also the expectation that you will do it back. So figure out what kind of information you're comfortable with sharing, and then maybe find the platform that best enables that kind of use. And then there are technological measures that you can take to minimize your risk. And the most important of these is, of course, how you take your picture and what apps you use. So when you're taking a picture, just try to avoid including your face or any identifiable information like a tattoo or a scar that's very distinctive, because just think of the worst case scenario. This may not happen, and the worst case scenario is that this picture gets leaked and is put on the internet. And if you don't have any identifiable information in that photograph, then you're okay. I mean, it is still a horrible thing to have happened, but it cannot be used to trace it back to you. So definitely avoid taking your face and any, tattoos and things like that. Try to use a neutral background which doesn't give away, too much of what your room looks like. And finally, it is definitely the most important factor, I would say, is the apps that you choose to sext on. WhatsApp is a big no no in my book. So is Facebook Messenger or even SMS. Because these are apps that don't destroy this information, can be saved by the other person, and they have a lifespan beyond what you can control. A Snapchat is probably the best app that, the most popular app that is, has a self destruct button and also informs you when someone takes a screenshot. So that's a good option. Instagram also has disappearing photos that the photo deletes after it's seen once or for 24 hours, and also informs you if it's taken a screenshot. And finally, we have to remember that sex is the same as sexting, and all of the rules of consent and making sure your partner is comfortable, all of those things apply. So if you wouldn't kiss someone without asking them first, then you shouldn't initiate a sexting conversation without asking. If you wouldn't flash your dick at someone on the street, then don't send an unsolicited dick pic, because all of those rules apply. So just ask. Asking is not a crime. Of course, there is a context, there's a time and place to asking. So if it's someone that you know professionally, or if you've talked to once and there's no hint of anything flirtatious, then it doesn't make sense to even just jump into something like asking about sexting or asking about sending images to each other. But if you feel like there is some sort of build up to something sexual that could happen, then just check and say, I'm feeling this way. Would you want to talk about it? Or like, are you okay with talking about this? Or something like that. You can frame it the way you want, but definitely just ask if someone's interested in jumping into a sexual conversation with you. There's also etiquette when it comes to sexting. These are just some basic things that people have to keep in mind. And here I'm mostly talking at men who are usually the perpetrators of revenge porn or image-based sexual abuse. Do not screenshot images that have been sent to you as disappearing photos. So if someone sent you a disappearing photo, it means they only want you to see it for 15 seconds or whatever time span they've set. But those are the boundaries within which that photo has been sent to you. So respect that and don't try to cheat the system by taking a screenshot, trying to cheat the woman who has or the person that has sent you this image, right? Do not push your boundaries without asking. So just like with sex, where a lot of people might have things that they're comfortable doing and things that they're not, even if they're having sex with you, the same applies for sexting, because sexting can feel very real. So if you feel like you're trying something new or a little bit different from what you've already been doing, just ask if they're okay with it. So that sort of ensures also that both partners are enthusiastically into the sexting and you're not just running away with some fantasy that you have that the other person doesn't even want to be a part of. One more thing that I've noticed that is very common and is often not even seen as manipulative, except that it is using trust as a bargaining tool to coerce someone into sexting with you or sharing nudes with you. So for instance, I've heard this a lot where men in specific usually are like, why don't you trust me enough to send me photos on WhatsApp? Why do you only have to send me disappearing photos? Do you think I'm a bad guy? Do you think I would ever do something to you? Is that what you think of me? Why don't you trust me, right? And you're basically guilt tripping your partner into doing something that they are uncomfortable with doing, which is not a great way to start a relationship or to, not a great thing to do in a relationship. And what you need to remember is that this is a very real fear that women and queer people live with a lot, right? So even if you are a trustworthy person, that doesn't make it any less stressful to send you a picture on WhatsApp, right? Because this is bigger than you. This is not about you. So don't make it about you and your hurt feelings, because this is about the very real fear that women and queer people live with when they are choosing to explore and express their sexuality. And if you can't respect that or you can't acknowledge that fear, then it becomes more about your hurt feelings than the risk of exploitation that women live with every single day. So don't do that. So I know that everything that I've talked about feels a little bit scary, There are a lot of things that could go wrong. But like I said, there is enough technology available today to really minimize the risks of sexting safely. So go for it, have fun, sext, be safe, and enjoy yourself.
Wow, I think Asmita really covered everything we wanted to talk about in this episode, right from best practices to also how we can navigate consent. And that brings us to the end of this episode. I think with something like the internet, it's really, really difficult to actually pinpoint key, oh, is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? It has certain things that it's certainly helpful with, but at the same time, it can also be a tool for violence, for oppression. So we just need to make sure that we stay safe and that we really use it in ways that makes us feel happy and comfortable and in control of our lives. So don't let anybody tell you, I guess, is a parting note, that your sexuality or your online experiences are for anybody else to police. And yeah.
And of course, there are online spaces where you could get more information on all of these things, like feminism in India. So, follow us on social media and tune in to our next episode where we will be talking about slut shaming and moral policing in courts. And thank you so much for listening to us. Bye bye.